In the silent vastness of the desert, where the dunes stretch endlessly like waves of a golden ocean, legends whisper of a name that few dare to speak aloud: Abaddon. Known as the Angel of the Abyss, he is not a figure of hope or light, but a shadow cast across the pages of sacred texts, a reminder that some forces were never meant to be awakened. But what if I told you that this name, buried in scripture and dismissed as myth, was tied to something more tangible, something that once shaped the fate of an entire city? A city that thrived, that laughed, that built temples to its own pride, and yet one night vanished beneath the sands as if swallowed whole by the earth itself. Could it be that this disappearance was not an accident of nature, but an execution of judgment? And if so, who or what was behind it? The story begins with a question, one that has haunted explorers, mystics, and the faithful alike. Why do entire civilizations rise to glory only to fall into dust, their ruins left as warnings carved into the silence of time? Most explanations point to droughts, wars, or the natural cruelty of shifting landscapes. But there are tales, darker and far less comfortable, that speak of powers unleashed when arrogance blinds men to the laws of the unseen. In those tales, destruction is not random, it is deliberate, almost surgical, as if summoned by a hand greater than any mortal could imagine. And at the center of these whispers stands the name Abaddon, not as metaphor, but as the embodiment of that judgment. Imagine standing before a dune that stretches higher than a cathedral, the wind cutting across your face, carrying grains of sand that sting like needles. Beneath your feet, hidden by centuries, lies the skeleton of a once mighty city. The walls that held markets bustling with life, the stones that echoed with songs and prayers, now buried under the silence of an eternal tomb. Legends say it was Abaddon himself who commanded the sands to rise, transforming the desert into a weapon, sealing the city in an unmarked grave. If true, then the desert is not empty. It is a cemetery, and each dune is a gravestone. But why would an angel, even one of the abyss, act with such violence? Was it punishment for the sins of men, or was it something deeper, something tied to the cosmic balance between creation and destruction? These are the questions that draw us into the heart of the mystery. They are not questions of archaeology alone, nor of theology alone, but of the thin, trembling line where myth and history collide. Tonight, we will cross that line. Tonight, we will step into the abyss and follow the shadow of Abaddon, to uncover how an angel's wrath could erase a city from existence, and why the echoes of that judgment still reverberate in the sands today. There are names that carry light, spoken in temples as prayers, lifted by voices that seek hope. And then there are names whispered only in the shadows, names that tremble on the tongue because they are not meant to be summoned. Abaddon is one of those names. In the book of Revelation, he appears as the king of the abyss, the ruler of locusts that rise from the pit, a being whose very essence is destruction. To speak his name was to acknowledge not only death, but the intelligence behind death, the will that drives ruin with purpose. For ancient scribes, the name was too heavy, too dangerous, and so it was often hidden, mistranslated, or replaced. Yet even when veiled, the shadow remained. In Hebrew, Abaddon means destruction or place of ruin. In Greek, he is called Apollyon, the destroyer. Across languages and epics, the name is less a description and more a sentence, a verdict carried in sound. And perhaps that is why so many cultures avoided saying it directly, choosing instead to describe its effects. To the Egyptians, he resembled a devourer of souls. To the Mesopotamians, he was kin to the storm gods that buried cities beneath sudden sands. In every corner of the ancient world, he appeared in disguise, but always with the same face, the face of annihilation. But what makes Abaddon different from demons, titans, or gods of chaos is his position in the spiritual hierarchy. He is not simply a monster unleashed upon the earth. He is, according to sacred texts, an angel. That word changes everything. An angel implies service, mission, obedience to a higher will. If Abaddon destroyed, then perhaps he was commanded to destroy. If he buried a city under the sands, then perhaps the act was not chaos but judgment, a deliberate erasure written into the destiny of mankind. This paradox, an angel of God yet an agent of devastation, terrified the faithful because it meant destruction itself could be divine. And so his name became forbiddance, avoided in prayer, concealed in teachings, left to the margins of Scripture. To utter Abaddon was to call attention to powers that should remain sleeping, as if words themselves could open cracks in the abyss. Yet the irony is that in silencing the name, people may have given it even greater power. A forbiddance word lingers longer than a spoken one. A secret grows sharper the more it is hidden. And Abaddon became not just a figure in sacred texts, but a shadow that slipped into myths, into folklore, into the unnamed terrors that haunt the edge of civilization. When explorers stumble upon ruins buried beneath centuries of sand, when they find symbols etched into stone that scholars refuse to explain, some whisper that the name is hidden there too, not carved in letters but present in the silence of the place, in the oppressive weight of air, in the sense that the earth itself remembers who sealed this tomb. And the earth, after all, never forgets. Abaddon is more than a name. He is a wound in history, and every time we uncover another city lost to the desert, we brush against the edge of his shadow. Long before the desert stretched endlessly as an ocean of silence, there was a city that thrived at its heart. Traders from distant lands brought spices, gems, and fabrics to its bustling markets. Its streets were alive with music, its temples crowned with gold that gleamed beneath the sun, its people clothed in silks and arrogance alike. To outsiders, it appeared invincible, a jewel set into the shifting sands, proof that human ambition could tame even the most unforgiving landscape. Yet beneath that brilliance, something darker pulsed, a pride that whispered they were untouchable, that no god nor angel could reach them. That whisper, as history shows us, was always the beginning of the end. This city had no need for humility. Its rulers commanded architects to build monuments that scraped the skies, pillars carved with symbols of victory, walls adorned with stories of conquest. Every stone was a declaration of defiance against the desert, against time itself. They celebrated their wealth with festivals that lasted for weeks, where wine flowed like rivers and torches burned through the night. They believed their walls, thick and high, would shield them from anything invading armies, droughts, even the wrath of heaven. But history is cruel to those who mistake permanence for eternity. Legends say the people of this city no longer honored the forces that had once guided them. Their prayers turned hollow, their rituals corrupted by greed. They bowed not to the divine, but to idols of their own making, shadows of power and lust. And as their hearts grew blind, the desert around them grew restless. Winds began to howl with a strange rhythm, carrying whispers that no ear could quite decipher. Travelers who approached the city reported feeling watched, as if eyes older than time itself lingered on the horizon. The wise warned that the city's days were numbered. The rulers, drunk on pride, only laughed. Imagine walking through those crowded streets at their peak. Children running between stalls, merchants shouting their bargains, priests chanting in sanctuaries filled with incense. It would have seemed impossible that such life could one day vanish, leaving only silence. Yet silence was already creeping in, like a shadow at the edge of every torch. The city's chronicles speak of dreams that plagued its people, visions of sand pouring into their homes, voices calling from beneath the earth, the sound of wings unfurling in darkness. Dreams that were dismissed as superstition until the day they became prophecy. For centuries after, all that remained was rumor. A city swallowed whole, erased so thoroughly that even its name was lost. But the desert remembers. The dunes that roll endlessly across the horizon are not empty. They are blankets covering graves, silence concealing stories. Somewhere beneath those layers of sand lies the heartbeat of that forgotten city, pulsing still with the echo of what was, and perhaps with the judgment that fell upon it. And at the center of that echo is the same forbidden name, the same angel who guards the abyss, Abaddon. The downfall of the forgotten city did not come overnight. It began slowly, like a sickness creeping through the veins of a body that once seemed unbreakable. At first, it was barely noticeable small acts of greed, rituals twisted ever so slightly from their original purpose, leaders who spoke more for their own glory than for the well-being of their people. But what begins as a crack in the foundation eventually brings down entire walls. In this city, those cracks spread until they became a chasm no one could cross. The people began to worship their own creations. Statues of stone and idols of fire replaced the reverence once offered to the divine. The temples, once places of prayer, became arenas of excess, where sacrifices were made not in devotion but in spectacle. Whispers tell of rites performed beneath the surface, hidden from the innocent, where the line between man and beast was crossed, and blood became currency for power. Each ritual pulled them further from light and deeper into the abyss that awaited them. The rulers, blind with pride, encouraged it. They declared themselves chosen, above the reach of judgment, beyond the laws of gods or angels. They exploited the poor, enslaved strangers from distant lands, and silenced anyone who spoke of omens. To them, warnings were nothing but the mutterings of the weak. Their arrogance grew so vast that they dared to mock the very heavens, believing themselves immortal. And yet, in mocking the heavens, they drew the gaze of something that had long been watching from below. It is said that the wind carried signs long before the catastrophe. Sandstorms rose suddenly and with unnatural fury, swallowing caravans whole. The sky at times glowed red at dusk, as if fire lingered just beneath the horizon. Travelers reported voices carried by the desert air voices that seemed to chant, to call, to warn. And still, the people of the city laughed. They believed themselves untouchable, their walls stronger than prophecy, their power greater than any angel's wrath. But pride is the oldest sin, and the one most certain to call destruction upon those who wear it like a crown. Imagine walking through their grand halls as torches burned high, their leaders feasting, wine spilling across marble floors while slaves trembled in silence. Imagine hearing the roar of the crowd as they offered sacrifices to idols that demanded more and more. In those moments, they believed themselves gods. But gods they were not. They were men who had forgotten humility, and in doing so, they sealed their fate. Because sin, when it grows unchecked, does not stay hidden forever. It calls, it beckons, and sooner or later, something answers. And what answered their arrogance was not a storm, nor an army, nor the slow decay of time. What answered was the abyss itself. And at the threshold of that abyss stood the angel whose name they dared not speak, Abaddon. There comes a moment in every tale of downfall when the warnings are no longer whispers but roars, when the invisible hand of judgment becomes visible, undeniable. For the forgotten city, that moment arrived in the form of Abaddon's awakening. Not born of chaos, but summoned by the weight of sin that had reached its limit, he rose from the abyss with a purpose as ancient as time itself. Legends describe his coming not with the clarity of eyewitnesses, but with the trembling fragments of memory carried through generation symbols, shadows, and the echo of a presence too vast to fully comprehend. The night it began, the air itself shifted. The wind no longer moved as it always had. It pulsed, carrying a rhythm like the beating of wings. The stars, once a blanket of light over the desert, seemed to dim as if veiled by something immense and unseen. In the temples, torches flickered and died without warning, plunging the worshippers into sudden darkness. And then came the sound, low at first, like the growl of a distant storm, but growing deeper, heavier, until it was no longer sound but vibration, rattling through stone, through bone, through the very core of the city. They said it was the voice of the abyss announcing the arrival of its king. Abaddon was not described as a creature of flesh, nor entirely of spirit. He was both presence and force, a shadow with form, a form with wings of endless span, eyes burning like coals that reflected the judgment of eternity. To some, he appeared as a towering angel clad in armor darker than night, his face hidden, his voice like thunder. To others, he was only felt, a terror that pressed upon the chest, leaving men gasping for air, paralyzed in their own fear. But all accounts agree on one thing: his arrival was not random. It was a response. The city's corruption had called him forth, and now he stood at its gates. The rulers laughed no longer. The people's songs of celebration turned to screams. Animals shrieked and fled into the desert as if the earth itself commanded them to escape. Children cried without reason, sensing the weight of something they could not name. And above it all, the wind carried the sound of wings, a shudder that echoed through every alley, every chamber, every heart. The abyss had opened, and its angel had stepped into the world of man. But Abaddon did not come with swords drawn or fire falling from the sky. His weapon was the desert itself. He lifted the sands, commanding them as one might command an army. The dunes rose like waves, the air thickened with dust, and the horizon vanished behind a storm that blotted out the sun. The city that had believed itself immortal now stood face to face with the angel of destruction, its pride crushed beneath the weight of judgment. For when Abaddon awakens, he does not speak of mercy. He speaks only in silence, in ruin, and in the burial of worlds. The storm began as a whisper, a veil of dust that danced lightly across the streets. At first, the people did not fear it. Sandstorms were part of desert life, inconveniences to be endured behind thick doors and shuttered windows. But this storm did not behave like the others. It grew with unnatural speed, swallowing the horizon, blotting out the moon, turning night into a deeper abyss. The wind howled with a voice that was not of this world, carrying a resonance that seemed to speak directly into the bones of those who heard it. The desert had awoken, and with it came the judgment of Abaddon. The walls that had stood for centuries, symbols of pride and security, trembled as the storm pressed against them like an army of shadows. Towers that had watched over the city crumbled one by one, their stones vanishing into the churning darkness. The sound of breaking was everywhere, pillars snapping, statues toppling, roofs torn from their beams. People ran through the streets in panic, but no matter where they fled, the sand followed, filling alleys, rising over thresholds, pouring through windows like a living flood. It was not just a storm. It was burial in motion, a deliberate hand pressing the city into silence. Mothers clutched their children as they sank knee-deep into dunes forming inside their homes. Merchants abandoned their treasures, gold and gems vanishing beneath waves of dust that cared nothing for wealth. Priests raised their arms to idols, pleading for mercy, but the idols themselves fell, shattered and drowned in the rising tide of sand. Screams carried through the darkness, but even those were muffled, swallowed by the weight of the storm. It was as if the desert itself had become Abaddon's voice, declaring that this city would be remembered no more. Some accounts say that in the heart of the storm, figures could be seen, shadows with wings, moving through the chaos, hurting the sand as though it were alive. Whether those were visions born of fear or true glimpses of the abyss, no one can say. What is certain is that within hours, the city that had believed itself eternal was gone. Streets where laughter once echoed were buried under dunes as high as mountains. Temples that had defied the heavens now lay beneath layers of silence. The proud city had not fallen to enemy swords or famine, but had been entombed by the very sands it had thought conquered. When the storm finally broke, the desert stretched unbroken in every direction. No walls, no towers, no voices, only an ocean of gold shimmering under the morning sun as if nothing had ever existed there. Travelers who later passed through the region spoke of a heaviness in the air, an oppressive stillness that pressed against the soul. They said the ground seemed to hum faintly, as though the heartbeat of the buried city still pulsed beneath, trapped forever under the hand of Abaddon. The sands had closed, but the memory of judgment lingered, hidden in silence, waiting for those who dared to uncover it. Centuries passed, and the memory of the city dissolved into rumor, its name erased from maps, its story reduced to whispers told around fires at night. Travelers crossed the desert, never suspecting that beneath their feet lay streets once alive with music and temples crowned in gold. Yet the desert is both destroyer and preserver. What it buries, it also protects. And so, fragments of the city slept beneath the dunes, waiting for hands bold enough or perhaps foolish enough to disturb them. When those hands finally came, they uncovered not just stones and relics, but questions too heavy for ordinary answers. The first explorers who stumbled upon the buried walls described the experience not as discovery, but as trespass. They spoke of air thick with silence, of shadows that lingered at the edge of their vision, of an oppressive weight that seemed to press down upon them the deeper they dug. They found carvings etched into fallen pillar symbols unlike any language they knew. Some resembled locusts with wings of fire, others spirals descending into darkness, and among them, a single word repeated over and over in a script long dead. Scholars argued over its meaning, but those who read the old tongues recognized it instantly: Abaddon. But what startled them most was not the carvings but the condition of the ruins. Unlike cities destroyed by fire or war, this one showed no signs of burning, no scars of battle. Instead, entire streets lay frozen in time, sealed in layers of sand so compact they had hardened into stone. Bowls still sat on tables, as if meals had been abandoned mid-bite. Doors remained intact, though buried, as if their owners had simply vanished. It was not the slow erosion of centuries, but a sudden, violent burial and execution carried out in silence. Some archaeologists dismissed the stories as exaggeration, choosing safer explanations. They blamed shifting dunes, earthquakes, or sudden storms that reshaped the land. But others could not shake the sense that something deliberate had happened here. Too many details aligned with ancient texts, too many symbols echoed warnings found in Scripture. And always, in the heart of their findings, the same name resurfaced. Not whispered this time, but carved, etched, branded into stone as if the city itself wanted to declare who had sealed its fate: Abaddon. Legends grew around these discoveries. Locals avoided the excavation sites, warning that the ruins carried a curse. Workers reported nightmares, visions of wings blotting out the sky, voices calling from beneath the sand. Tools broke without reason, lamps extinguished themselves in still air, and those who mocked the warnings often fell sick or left in terror. Even today, the ruins remain a place of unease. To some, they are simply remnants of an ancient city destroyed by chance. To others, they are the fingerprint of the abyss, a reminder that some names are carved not only in stone, but in the very earth itself. When we speak of cities lost beneath the sands, it is tempting to see only natural disasters, to reduce them to accidents of geology and time. But what if their burial was not blind chance? What if the silence covering them was not the work of wind and dust alone, but the mark of a force that operates beyond human understanding? The story of Abaddon forces us to confront this possibility that destruction itself can be an act of design, a judgment written into the fabric of existence. In this light, the forgotten city is not merely a ruin, but a testimony carved into the earth, a warning left for all who come after. Ancient texts do not describe Abaddon as chaos unbound. They portray him as an angel, one who acts with purpose. If that is true, then his presence at the fall of the city was not coincidence. It was a verdict. The people had surrendered to corruption, worshipped idols of their own making, mocked the divine, and fed the abyss with their pride. Abaddon did not rise to destroy without cause. He rose because balance had been broken and what was once sacred had been profaned. His arrival was the closing of a ledger, the execution of a sentence long overdue. This shifts the way we see the desert itself. To most, it is emptiness, a place where nothing survives. But perhaps the desert is something more, a vast seal, a cloak of silence laid down to cover what should not be remembered. Beneath its golden waves lie not just bones and broken walls, but energies too dangerous to release. If Abaddon buried the city, it may have been not only to punish, but to contain. The sands became chains, holding fast the echoes of sin, ensuring that the corruption would not spread beyond its borders. The spiritual truth, then, is unsettling. It tells us that some ruins are not meant to be unearthed, some names not meant to be spoken. Every excavation, every attempt to dig deeper, risks peeling back a layer of protection woven by forces we barely comprehend. To uncover is not always to enlighten. Sometimes it is to disturb. And those who disturb must reckon with what they awaken. But this truth also reflects back upon us. The city's fall was not just about its people, it is a mirror held up to humanity. Every age builds its towers of pride, its idols of wealth and power, its rituals that drift from meaning into spectacle. And every age forgets that judgment comes not in thunder from the skies, but often in silence, in ways that seem at first like coincidence. Abaddon is not only the angel of the abyss. He is the reminder that destruction has a reason, that ruin is never without message. And so the city buried beneath the sands becomes more than history. It becomes prophecy. A silent voice speaking across centuries, asking us whether we will listen or whether, like those before us, we will laugh until the sands rise once more. The story of the buried city might feel like distant myth, an echo from a forgotten age, but the truth is that its warnings still resound in the present. Look closely, and you will see the same patterns repeating across our modern world. Cities rise in deserts, towers scrape the skies, technology and wealth become the new idols of power. Humanity congratulates itself for progress, for bending nature to its will, for defying limits once thought sacred. And yet, beneath the triumph, the same arrogance stirs, the same pride that whispers, "We are untouchable." History has shown us how quickly such whispers call the abyss. In recent years, entire towns have vanished beneath sandstorms, floods, or shifting earth, swallowed so suddenly that survivors describe it as though the ground itself had conspired against them. From the Sahara to the Middle East, dunes are creeping into once thriving villages, burying roads, homes, and fields. Oceans rise, washing away coastlines where civilizations have lived for centuries. It may seem like climate, like chance, but the echoes of prophecy make us wonder, are these merely natural cycles, or are they the signs of something greater, a rhythm of judgment repeating itself? What unsettles most is the way symbols return. Across excavation sites, from Mesopotamia to North Africa, archaeologists uncover inscriptions warning of ruin, carved thousands of years apart, yet speaking the same language. Destruction comes when balance is broken. Some whisper that Abaddon's shadow has never left, that he does not dwell only in the abyss of myth, but in the patterns of collapse that haunt every empire. His name is not just tied to one city buried long ago, it resurfaces wherever pride blinds humanity to consequence. Consider the silence after disaster. When earthquakes level a city, when hurricanes reduce homes to splinters, when deserts reclaim roads overnight, survivors often speak of a presence beyond explanation. They describe stillness, an atmosphere heavy as if watched, as if a force greater than nature itself pressed its hand upon the earth. These accounts mirror the legends of the forgotten city, a terror not just of loss, but of recognition that humanity is never truly in control, no matter how high it builds its walls. And perhaps the most chilling sign lies not in the ruins of yesterday or the storms of today, but in ourselves. We repeat the same sins. We build idols out of wealth and power. We laugh at warnings. We exploit the weak. We convince ourselves that progress places us beyond the reach of consequence. In doing so, we summon the same silence that once fell upon that desert city, For Abaddon's role is not bound to the past. His shadow lingers in every age, waiting for the moment when arrogance outweighs humility, when the balance tips once more. The question is not whether judgment will come, it is whether we will recognize the signs before it does. The sands are always waiting. The desert is more than an empty landscape. It is a graveyard of worlds, a silent witness to civilizations that rose in brilliance and fell in arrogance. Beneath its shifting waves of sand lie stories not yet told, warnings carved into the earth itself. Among those stories, one stands out above all: the city buried by Abaddon, the angel of the abyss. It is not just a tale of destruction. It is a mirror held up to every age, including our own. For in the end, the sands do not only cover the ruins of the past, they foreshadow the fate of the future. As we look upon these stories, it becomes clear that the fall of the city was not simply about punishment. It was about remembrance. The silence that covers its ruins is a message across time. Forget humility, and you will be forgotten. Every empire that has fallen since has followed the same path: wealth turned to arrogance, faith twisted into spectacle, power raised above compassion. Each thought itself eternal. Each now lies in ruins, waiting for the winds of the desert to scatter their bones. Abaddon, then, is more than a figure of fear. He is the embodiment of a truth humanity resists, that destruction is not always chaos, but sometimes judgment. He does not need to be seen to be present. His shadow lingers in the storms that rise without warning, in the seas that swallow the coasts, in the silence that follows collapse. To ignore him is to ignore the pattern, to laugh as others once laughed, until the sands themselves rise to answer. But the closing question is not about the past, it is about us. Are we any different from the people of that forgotten city? We build monuments of steel and glass. We place our faith in technology. We exploit the earth without mercy, and we silence voices that warn us of consequence. We call progress eternal, but eternity belongs to forces beyond our command. If pride was enough to summon the abyss once, what do we believe will spare us now? Perhaps that is why the story of Abaddon has survived, carried in whispers, hidden in scripture, carved into ruins. It survives because it is not finished. The buried city may be silent, but silence speaks louder than words. It calls to us, asking whether we will repeat its fate or learn from its end. And in that choice lies our own future. As the camera of your imagination pulls back, picture the desert stretching endlessly, dunes glowing under the fading sun. Somewhere beneath them lies the heartbeat of a city erased and the shadow of the angel who buried it. The sands may cover it, but the story still breathes, waiting for those willing to listen. The question remains: will we hear it, or will we too vanish beneath the silence of the abyss?